Why was the general smiling like that? Why did every face in that circle of young officers carry the same smirk, the same hungry expectation of failure? Captain Victoria Sterling stood at the firing line with the Kentucky sun burning down on her shoulders, a still figure against the restless shuffle of uniforms and laughter. She didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't rise to the bait of their eyes, because if she did, if she allowed even one fragment of what she truly carried to slip across her face, the whole fragile she had built over 15 years would shatter. They saw her as a desk officer, a logistics captain, a 42-year-old woman who looked like she belonged behind spreadsheets instead of rifles. She had carefully constructed that identity, shaping it like armor, but armor has weight, and the weight was crushing her. General Harrison's voice boomed across the range, full of arrogance disguised as mentorship. Ladies, and this is what happens when you let paperwork soldiers think they can play war. 2,847 meters, that's the shot. Only 3 people in Fort Campbell's history have ever made it, all of them legends. He paused, savoring the moment. And today, our transfer believes she can join their company. Phones clicked out of pockets. Officers elbowed one another. Some of them had probably bet on how wide her shot would miss. Victoria's jaw stayed tight. Inside, however, something stirred, not anger, not fear, but a deep ache. Because she remembered another time, another day when the impossible distance was not a joke but a sentence. When soldiers had been screaming into radios, waiting for her to do what she had been trained to do. And she had done it. She had pulled the trigger. The shot had been perfect. And then 3 men had died anyway. The memory rose sharp and uninvited. October 2008. Afghanistan, Firebase Phoenix under siege, the compound burning, mortars raining in, and a sniper team, her team, huddled into a corner of rubble, eyes wide, trusting her. Johnson's voice in her ear, "Ghost, take the shot, clear us a path." The nickname cut through her chest like glass. Ghost. Nobody here called her that. Nobody here even knew it had been her name. As far as the records showed, Monica Cross, Sergeant First Class, 4 Tour, 73 confirmed kills, had died that same year. Buried beneath paperwork, erased by classified necessity. What lived now was Victoria Sterling, the careful shadow. And if she didn't keep that name intact, everything she'd endured in silence would have been for nothing. "Captain," Harrison barked, his grin widening. "Do you really want to humiliate yourself in front of all these witnesses? Maybe we should start you at 500 meters, something safer, something realistic." The circle chuckled. Lieutenant let out a low whistle. "Logistics officer, huh, sir? Maybe she can at least calculate the wind drift." More laughter. Victoria exhaled slowly. Her expression didn't change. Because the truth, she could calculate the wind drift in her sleep. Harrison placed the rifle in her hands with theatrical flourish. The M24 sniper system, heavier than the civilian rifles she had been deliberately seen with over the past months, but in her grip, it wasn't heavy at all. It was familiar, too familiar, like shaking the hand of an old friend you swore you'd never see again. The general leaned close, his voice low enough for her alone. "Let's see if you're soldier enough to even find the target." And there it was, the dismissal, the certainty that she would fail. For a moment Victoria considered letting him be right. Firing wild, missing badly, walking away as the quiet, forgettable officer she had pretended to be for so long. It would be safe. It would protect her secret. But then she remembered Johnson, Miller, their faces in the last instant she'd seen them alive, the way she had led them forward, the way her perfection had placed them in imperfection's path. She remembered the funerals she could never attend, the families she could never face. And she thought hiding isn't honoring, it never was. "Whenever you're ready, Captain," Harrison said loudly, his tone dripping with condescension. She lowered herself to the ground, the laughter dimmed. Because in that moment she stopped being the paper pusher they thought she was. Her body remembered what her mind had fought to bury. The ritual came back like breath itself, Prone position. Scope check. Zero verify. Mirage red. Wind feel. Every motion fluid, efficient, silent. Lieutenant Martinez frowned, lowering his binoculars. "Sir," he whispered, uncertain now, "look at her position. That's not rookie form." Harrison waved him off. "Amateurs can copy stances, just watch." But Martinez wasn't watching her stance. He was watching the way she breathed, slow, deliberate, timing her body to the world itself. Victoria's eyes found the target. 18 inches of steel almost 3 kilometers away, a shimmer in the heat, a speck against the horizon. To anyone else, impossible. To her, just another ghost from another life. The scope's crosshairs wavered with her heartbeat. She timed it, waiting for the space between, the space where silence lived. And for a fleeting second, the weight of 15 years fell away. She was Captain Sterling anymore. She wasn't the desk officer, the forgotten transfer, the butt of the general's joke. She was Ghost, the soldier who had saved lives, ended lives, carried the unbearable ledger of both. Her finger rested on the trigger, not pulling, not yet, just feeling, because the instant she pulled, she would reveal herself, and there would be no going back. Around her, the circle of officers had gone quieter. Phones hovered in midair, recording, but even the wind seemed to hush. Harrison's confidence cracked into irritation. "What's the delay, Captain? Afraid?" She didn't answer, couldn't, because the truth wasn't fear. The truth was choice. Did she stay hidden and safe, or did she fire and let the legend walk again? Her breathing slowed. The crosshairs steadied. Her heartbeat aligned with the silence between beats. And in that fragile stillness, she heard Johnson's voice echoing from 15 years ago. "Ghost, we need that shot now." Her finger began to tighten. But whether she would release the past or unleash it, no one at Fort Campbell could possibly predict. What does silence sound like? It isn't absence, not really. It's the fullness of everything holding its breath at once. The wind paused, the laughter died, even the cicadas seemed to fall mute. In that suspended second, all that existed was steel, distance, and a woman who had been hiding for 15 years. Victoria's finger closed on the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, sharp but familiar, like the punch of an old sparring partner who knew exactly where to land the blow. The .308 round leapt into the sky, a blur no eye could follow. It had 3 seconds to travel nearly 3 kilometers, 3 seconds to decide whether she had just destroyed her life or reclaimed it. The air around her tightened. Harrison froze, binoculars locked to his face. Martinez leaned forward, lips parted. His phone trembled in his grip. Every soldier there knew the math. 2,847 meters was not a shot, it was a miracle. 1 second. Through her scope, Victoria saw the shimmer of air, the invisible rivers of heat-bending light. She felt time stretching, longer than it ever had in combat, longer than when the world had depended on her trigger finger. 2 seconds. Afghanistan came flooding back, the compound, the dust, the screams, Johnson's voice, the terrible beauty of a bullet cutting through distance to deliver both salvation and damnation. 3 seconds. The sound arrived, steel kissing steel, sharp and undeniable, a perfect center strike. The silence didn't break, it detonated, gasps, a muffled curse, someone dropped their phone. General Harrison's binoculars slipped from his hands, dangling on their strap as his mouth hung open. He had mocked her, dismissed her, offered her humiliation as entertainment. Now he stared at the impossible. "That's not," his voice faltered, he swallowed hard. "That's not possible." The young officers crowded around the spotting scopes. Dead center, clean hit. No way, she didn't even flinch. Lieutenant Martinez turned to the general, his voice almost reverent. "Sir, that wasn't luck, that was mastery." Harrison's face flushed, color draining to something close to fear. He looked at her not as a desk officer, not as a joke, but as something he didn't understand. Something dangerous. Victoria lifted her head slowly from the scope. The sun caught in her eyes, and for the first time in 15 years, she didn't look away. "Who the hell are you?" Harrison demanded. She could have lied again, could have shrugged, could have claimed coincidence. But the weight in her chest had grown too heavy. Some truths bury you if you never set them free. "My name," her voice was quiet, steady, "was Sergeant First Class Monica Cross, call sign Ghost." The words fell into the stunned air like stones into a pond. Ripples of recognition spread through the group. Lieutenant's face went pale, his phone slipping from nerveless fingers. Colonel, older than the rest, blinked hard, as though seeing a ghost walk back from the grave. "You're supposed to be dead," he whispered. Victoria, no, Monica nodded once. The records say what they needed to say. General Harrison staggered back a step, his confidence stripped bare. "I know that name. I've read those reports, the classified ones. 73 confirmed kills, 4 deployments. The only sniper in history to hit over 3,200 meters. 3,218 Hindu Kush Mountains, 2008. "Correct," Monica said, her tone calm, detached. "Enemy sniper targeting a medevac. 1 shot. 3 wounded soldiers made it home instead of being draped in flags." Sergeant, the youngest, stared at her with awe. "That's the longest confirmed kill in combat history." "And my last as Monica Cross," she answered. 3 days later, Johnson and Miller were dead, and so was I on paper. The weight of it pressed down on the group. The laughter, the arrogance, the smug certainty gone. In its place, only silence, broken now by the faint whisper of wind through the grass. Harrison's voice, when it returned, was a rasp. "Why now? Why reveal yourself here?" Monica looked back at the steel plate, the impossible distance made intimate by her bullet. Her chest tightened, and for a moment she thought of saying nothing. But hiding had never brought peace, only rot. "Because hiding from who I was dishonored the people who followed me. Johnson, Miller, I buried myself to bury their memory. Today I realized I'd been doing the opposite. I'd been erasing them." She paused, her voice low. "They deserve better than my silence." Martinez spoke carefully, almost afraid of the answer. "Ma'am, how many lives did you save?" Her eyes dropped. "I stopped counting after the first 100. She let the words hang, heavy, dangerous. "Because it was never about numbers. Every shot I took or didn't take had consequences. Lives spared. Lives ended. Families changed forever. I learned too late that precision isn't just about hitting the target. It's about knowing when the target isn't the point." The young officers shifted, the reality of her words colliding with the mythology they had carried about snipers and legends. Colonel took a slow step closer. "If you're back, if you're alive, then what now? What do you do, Ghost?" For the first time in years, Monica let herself feel the question. Let herself admit she didn't know. For 15 years she had lived as a ghost, not just by name but by existence, hiding in shadows, shuffling papers, pretending the war was behind her. But now she had crossed the line she swore never to cross. Her chest rose with a deep breath. "Maybe I learn how to live with what I did right, not just what I did wrong." The general had no words. His arrogance, his certainty, his smugness had all been pierced clean through like the steel plate on the range. He looked at her as though she carried something more dangerous than any rifle. And she did. She carried truth. The circle of officers still stared, some in awe, some in fear, some in disbelief. The legend they had thought a bedtime story in sniper school was standing in front of them, real, breathing, alive. And somewhere in the stunned silence, Monica Cross felt the faintest lift, a weight loosening, a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding for 15 years finally exhaled. But freedom is never free, she knew that. By revealing herself, she had opened doors she could never close. Harrison would report this. The army would want answers. The past would come flooding back, and with it, the choices she had fled from. She looked once more at the target shimmering in the heat. The perfect hole her bullet had carved. A reminder, a confession, a resurrection. The ghost was back, and nothing would ever be the same. What do you say to a ghost standing in front of you? The answer, it turned out, was nothing. Not at first. The men around her, trained officers, combat veterans, soldiers who prided themselves on their steel nerves, stood frozen, as if their rifles had turned to stone in their hands. The shot still echoed, not in sound but in the stunned faces watching her. Monica remained on the ground, calm, composed, her hands resting on the M24 as if it belonged there, as if the last 15 years of paper pushing had never happened. The silence stretched, long and uncomfortable. Colonel was the first to break it. His voice trembled in disbelief. "Ghost, Sergeant Monica Cross." She lifted her head. "Yes, sir." His weathered face went pale. He looked at Harrison, then back at her. "You were declared KIA, Firebase Phoenix. I read the report myself." "You read what they needed you to read," Monica said. Her tone wasn't bitter, only tired. "Sometimes the truth is too heavy for the public record, so they bury it, along with the people who carried it." General Harrison finally found his voice, though it came out raw. "Your file, I've seen parts of it, classified. You were—" He stopped, shaking his head, unwilling to believe what his own eyes confirmed. 73 confirmed kills, 4 deployments, Hindu Kush, 3,200 meters. His jaw clenched, his voice a whisper. "The longest shot in history." Monica didn't correct him, though part of her wanted to. She remembered that day in the mountains too vividly, the sniper on the ridge, the medevac helicopter pinned in the valley. She remembered lining up the shot, pulling the trigger, saving lives with one impossible bullet. And she remembered how 3 days later, the same precision had walked Johnson and Miller into an IED. Precision wasn't salvation. It was just math. "They called you Ghost," Sergeant whispered, his voice reverent. "The sniper school instructors told stories. We thought they were just myths." Her eyes softened on him. They weren't myths, but maybe they should have been. His phone clattered against the gravel as it slipped from his shaking hand. "You," his voice cracked, "you're supposed to be dead." "Part of me is," Monica said simply. "The part that believed a bullet could fix everything." For a long moment no one spoke. Even Harrison, usually so quick with derision, seemed hollowed out by what he'd witnessed. His arrogance was gone, replaced by something Monica recognized all too well: fear. Not of her exactly, but of the truth she carried. He finally cleared his throat, the sound dry, brittle. "Why show yourself now? After all these years, why break cover? Why here?" Her eyes drifted back to the target, 3 kilometers away, steel with the neat circle her round had carved. She let herself breathe before she answered. "Because I've been living as someone else for 15 years, pretending those men didn't die because of me, pretending I wasn't the one who cleared the path." She paused, feeling her chest tight. "I thought hiding was honoring them, but it was the opposite. I erased myself, and with me I erased them." She swallowed hard. "Today I realized they deserve more than silence." The young officers exchanged uneasy glances. For them, sniper legends were about glory, perfect shots, records, myth. But Monica spoke with the weight of someone who had lived long enough to understand that every perfect shot left an imperfect scar. Colonel stepped closer, studying her carefully. "You said Phoenix. That was Johnson's team, wasn't it?" Her throat tightened. The memory returned vivid and merciless. October 2008, Afghanistan. The night sky lit orange with tracer fire, radio chatter breaking with static, Johnson's voice in her ear, calm but urgent. "Ghost, we're pinned down. Mortar fire. We need that sniper gone." She had spotted him, Taliban sniper directing fire from a rooftop nearly 3 kilometers away. Perfect angle, perfect sight picture. The wind had been steady, the air thin in the high desert. She squeezed the trigger. The enemy sniper crumpled. The mortars ceased. The squad advanced. And then the earth exploded. She still remembered the sound of it. the blast that swallowed their voices mid-sentence. Johnson's last breath cut short. The IED had been planted along the path her shot had cleared. She had given them confidence. She had given them death. They trusted me, she whispered now, eyes unfocused, and I walked them straight into it. The group stayed silent. Not one of them dared interrupt. For 15 years, Monica continued softly, I blamed my precision. Thought if I'd missed, if I'd been less skilled, maybe they'd still be alive. She exhaled, her voice trembling. But maybe soldiers die not because of one bullet, but because war doesn't care about perfection. Maybe I just wanted control over something uncontrollable. Sergeant's brow furrowed. Ma'am, you saved hundreds of lives, maybe thousands. Monica's eyes met his, sharp but sad. And ended hundreds too. Never forget that the math cuts both ways. Every round I fired had a name attached, not just the one on the ground, the families, the children, the futures erased before they could begin. Martinez shifted, uneasy. But you were fighting the enemy, ma'am. Were they all enemies? Monica asked, her voice sharp enough to sting. She let the silence hang, the question cutting deeper than any lecture. Finally, she added softer, sometimes they were just boys with rifles, forced into service, fighting because someone told them to, same as us. You tell me, where does the line between enemy and victim blur? The words lingered like smoke in their lungs. General Harrison turned away, wiping his brow, as though the weight of her truth was heavier than any rifle he had ever carried. He muttered almost to himself, God help me, I mocked you. You saw what you were meant to see, Monica said gently. A desk officer, unremarkable, forgettable. I built that mask for people like you, for my own survival. Finally found his voice, shaky but insistent. So what now? What happens to you? For the first time, Monica allowed herself a flicker of uncertainty. She truly didn't know. By making the shot, she had ended 15 years of cover. The Army would have questions. The Pentagon would stir. Old files would surface. I don't know, she admitted. For 15 years, I've been trying to figure out how to live with the mistakes I made. Maybe now I need to figure out how to live with the things I did right. Colonel's gaze softened. The Army needs soldiers with your kind of wisdom, not just your skill, but the understanding that comes with it. Harrison turned, finally meeting her eyes. The condescension was gone. In its place was something closer to awe, though laced with fear. Fort is building a new advanced sniper training program. We need someone who can teach them not just to make the impossible shots, but to understand the weight of them, to pass on what the legends never said out loud. Monica stared at him, the thought clawed at her chest. Teaching, passing on what she had spent her life trying to forget. Was that redemption, or just another burden? Her gaze drifted once more toward the target, still shimmering in the sun. The steel bore her confession, her past, her rebirth. She didn't answer yet, couldn't, because deep inside the battlefield wasn't finished with her, and if she took this path she would have to become Ghost again, not just in skill but in honesty. And she wasn't sure the world was ready for that. What does it feel like to walk back into the light after hiding in the shadows for 15 years? Monica Cross found out 3 months later at Fort. The advanced sniper training program was new, untested, and controversial. Many at the Pentagon wanted a legend at its head, someone who could give the program instant credibility. But what they got wasn't a legend in the way they imagined. What they got was a woman still haunted by ghosts, carrying scars that didn't show on her skin. Monica stood at the front of a bare classroom, 12 young men and women staring at her as though she were both myth and monster. Marines, Rangers, Navy SEALs, Air Force marksmen, each hand-picked from their branches, each already one of the best shooters in their units. And yet here they sat, waiting for her, notebooks open, rifles stowed, anticipation in their eyes. She didn't start with rank. She didn't start with numbers or stories of impossible kills. Instead, she turned to the whiteboard and wrote 6 words. What is the most important shot? Silence. The students exchanged confused glances. They had come expecting ballistic calculations, wind calls, scope adjustments, the science of killing. Instead, their new instructor had begun with a riddle. Finally, Sergeant Williams, a Marine with the build of a linebacker, raised his hand. "Ma'am, it's the one that takes out the highest value target, the one that changes the mission." Monica nodded slowly. "That's one answer." She turned back to the group. "Anyone else?" Corporal Jackson, a young ranger with sharp eyes, spoke next. "The most important shot is the one you don't miss." More nods around the room. It was the answer most of them believed, the creed they had carried through sniper school: hit the target, win the fight. But Staff Sergeant, a Navy SEAL, leaned forward. His voice was quiet but steady. "Ma'am, maybe it's the one you don't take." The room shifted uneasily. Even the air seemed to pause. Monica's eyes fixed on him, something in her gaze softening. "Explain." "Swallowed, Kandahar, last year. Taliban commander in my crosshairs. Clear shot, no wind, no obstacles. But there was a kid in the yard, playing with a ball. 20 feet from the target, I waited. Hours, the commander left. 3 days later, he hit one of our convoys. 2 Marines died." His jaw tightened. "I've carried that ever since, felt like failure." Monica didn't move for a long moment. Then she stepped closer, her voice low, deliberate. "What if I told you the child was his nephew? That he put him there on purpose because he knew you wouldn't fire?" His eyes widened. "How could you know that?" "Because I had the same shot," she said softly. 18 months earlier, same compound, same commander, only I pulled the trigger." The silence was suffocating now. Every student leaned forward, eyes wide. "I thought I had saved lives. Perfect shot. Commander dead. No civilian casualties." Her gaze drifted, distant. "But that child ran inside screaming. He grew up to be one of the most effective IED makers in Afghanistan. 37 Americans died from his devices over the next 5 years." Her words landed like a blow. Looked stricken, his regret colliding with something harsher, the realization that inaction and action both carried blood. "The shot you don't take," Monica continued, "can haunt you. The shot you do take can haunt you too. That's why you're here. Not to learn how to fire a rifle. You already know how. You're here to learn judgment. Because judgment, not marksmanship, is what separates the legend from the butcher." The students were silent now. Even Williams, who had carried himself with bravado, sat back in his chair, unsettled. Monica let the silence breathe. Then she drew a line across the board beneath her question. "Every bullet has consequences," she said. "If you don't understand that, you're just expensive destruction." She saw their faces shift, skepticism, unease, a flicker of respect. They had expected formulas and calculations. Instead, they were being asked to carry weight they had never considered. Later, as the class broke for chow, Jackson lingered. His eyes were troubled, his voice low. "Ma'am, how do you live with it, knowing what your choices did?" Monica studied him for a long moment. He was young, too young to carry what she carried, though he would carry it soon enough. "You don't live with it," she said finally. "You carry it, and if you're lucky, you learn to carry it well." That night, alone in her quarters, she pulled a photograph from her drawer. Johnson, Miller, 3 young faces grinning into the camera, sand dusting their uniforms. She traced the edge of the photo with her finger, her throat tightening. "I'm still teaching," she whispered, "just different lessons now." The next morning, she walked back into the classroom. The students looked different, not in their uniforms, not in their rifles, but in their eyes. There was a weight there now, a recognition. They weren't being trained to pull triggers. They were being trained to decide whether to. She began the day not with a lecture, but with a story. 2007, I eliminated a sniper who had killed 2 of our soldiers, textbook shot, clean, efficient. Later, I learned he was 15 years old, forced to fight, a child. She let the weight hang, watched their faces. Was I wrong to take that shot? They shifted uncomfortably. Williams spoke first. He was armed, ma'am. He killed our people. You had no choice. Maybe, Monica said softly. Or maybe I didn't look hard enough for another way. The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable. Then she added, the shots that haunt you aren't the ones you miss. They're the ones you make without thinking about the consequences. One by one, she saw it sink in. The bravado dimmed. The mythology cracked. These weren't just lessons in precision. They were lessons in humanity. And maybe, for the first time in 15 years, Monica Cross felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel since Firebase Phoenix. Purpose. How do you teach soldiers not to become you? That question haunted Monica every time she stood at the front of the classroom at Fort. She could lecture about wind calls, elevation, and ballistics with her eyes closed, but none of that mattered here. The Pentagon hadn't dragged her out of hiding to teach marksmanship. They wanted her scars. They wanted her ghosts. So she gave them both. Every one of you will receive a scenario, she told the class one gray Carolina morning. A stack of folders sat on her desk, heavy as stone. She opened the first. Some will ask you to shoot. Some will demand that you don't. And some will force you to choose when there's no right answer. The room stilled. Soldiers who had once worn their confidence like armor now sat, eyes narrowing, sensing that the easy part of the course was over. Monica handed out the folders. Corporal Jackson flipped his open first, his brows furrowed. Ma'am, what if we make the wrong choice? You will, Monica said evenly. Every choice in combat has consequences. The goal isn't to be perfect. The goal is to be human enough to live with what you choose. Her words hung in the air long after the exercises began. That night she dreamed of Johnson again. He wasn't in uniform this time. He wasn't barking into the radio, calling for Ghost to clear the rooftop. He was sitting on a porch somewhere in civilian clothes, sipping a beer, smiling. For a heartbeat, Monica thought she'd stepped into the life he might have had if she hadn't pulled the trigger. Then the scene shattered. The porch became rubble. The beer bottle a shard of glass. His face melted into blood and dust, mouth open mid-scream. Monica jerked awake in the dark. Her breath came fast, hands clenched in the sheets as though still gripping the M24. 15 years hadn't dulled it. If anything, teaching had sharpened it again. The ghosts didn't like being dragged back into the light. She sat on the edge of the bed, trembling, pressing her palms into her eyes. In the silence, the question returned. How do you teach soldiers not to become you? 2 days later, the classroom held its first real debate. Staff Sergeant stood at the whiteboard, folder in hand. Taliban commander, surrounded by civilians. My unit's convoy under fire. No clean shot. I chose restraint. We pulled back. Monica nodded, and the result? He escaped, admitted. He regrouped. 2 weeks later, his men ambushed one of our patrols. 4 Americans killed. The room was heavy. Monica stepped closer. Do you regret your choice, Sergeant? Hesitated every day. Good, Monica said. His head snapped up in surprise. Because regret is what makes us human. Without it, you'd be a machine. And war has enough machines already. She turned to the class. Listen carefully. You will make choices that cost lives. Sometimes your restraint will kill. Sometimes your trigger pull will kill. Either way, you will carry it. The weight never leaves. The only question is whether you let it crush you or shape you. She looked at, the men who died weren't killed by your inaction. They were killed by war. You gave them a chance. That's all any of us ever do. The room was silent. For some, her words were comfort. For others, a deeper wound. But Monica didn't let them off easy. Do you want to know which decisions will haunt you the most? She scanned their faces. The ones where you never stop asking, what if? That evening she stayed late, grading their responses, reading their reasoning. Some chose clean shots with no hesitation. Others wrote long paragraphs of justification for restraint. She underlined phrases, circled rationalizations, scribbled notes in margins. She wasn't looking for right answers. She was looking for honesty. The clock ticked past midnight before she realized her hands were trembling again. The folder in front of her was labeled Firebase Phoenix Case Study. She had meant to assign it later. Instead, she found herself staring at the pages, her own words from years ago typed neatly across the paper. Coordinates, wind calls, target analysis. All the sterile, perfect math of the shot that had saved a squad and killed her brothers-in-arms 3 minutes later. She closed the file sharply, her chest tight. Teaching meant reliving, and reliving meant bleeding all over again. One morning, Lieutenant asked the question none of them had dared yet. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "what was your longest confirmed kill?" The room turned toward her. She felt the air thicken. 3,218 meters, Monica said. Her voice was flat, distant. Hindu Kush Mountains. Enemy sniper targeting a medevac. 1 round, perfect conditions. Williams let out a low whistle. That's a world record. Monica's eyes darkened. It's also the last shot I fired as Monica Cross. She told them the rest. 3 days later, Johnson and Miller were gone. She told them how she had been buried in paperwork, reborn as Victoria Sterling, erased from history because the legend had become too dangerous to live. The classroom stayed silent, the truth heavier than any ballistics chart. "You came here expecting to learn how to be the best shooters in the world," Monica said finally. "But being the best doesn't mean the longest shot. It doesn't mean the cleanest record. Being the best means carrying the weight and still finding a way to walk forward." Her voice faltered. "I didn't always do that well. Maybe you'll do better." That night she dreamed again. This time it was Johnson. It was the boy. 15 years old, rifle clutched in shaking hands. The child soldier she had killed outside. He didn't say anything. Just stood there, eyes wide, a hole blooming red in his chest. Then behind him came another face. Taliban sniper she had killed in 2006. Behind him, Sergeant, the American he had gunned down before Monica ended him. Both young, both dead, both starring. Monica woke choking on her own breath, hands clutching the sheets. She stumbled to the sink, splashing water on her face, staring into the mirror. A ghost stared back. "Still teaching," she whispered hoarsely. "But God help me, I don't know if I'm saving them or cursing them." The next day her students noticed her fatigue. They didn't ask. Soldiers rarely did. But something in their eyes told her they understood. Maybe for the first time, they saw her not just as a legend, but as a human being broken and rebuilt in jagged pieces. And maybe that was the real lesson. Because the greatest danger wasn't missing the shot. It was becoming numb to what the shot meant. And that was the one thing Monica Cross refused to let them become. How do you measure success in war? By bodies, by missions, by medals, or by the lives that make it home when they shouldn't have? Monica Cross thought about that question constantly, and for the first time in years, she wasn't asking it just for herself. 6 weeks into the program, the reports started coming in. General Harrison called her into his office one morning, a thick envelope of dispatches on his desk. He slid them across to her without a word. She opened the first. Staff Sergeant, deployed back to Afghanistan. He had eyes on a high-value target in a village compound. The man was a known commander, clean shot, except for the cluster of children playing in the courtyard. The old would have fired, this didn't. He waited. Hours passed. Then, instead of pulling the trigger, he called in an ops team. They convinced the family to evacuate. When the compound emptied, the commander surrendered. No bloodshed, no collateral damage. At the bottom of the report had scribbled a single line. "Ghost taught me to see the whole picture." Monica's chest tightened. She set the paper aside and opened the next. Lieutenant, Syria. He had tracked an IED team setting charges along a supply route. Instead of firing immediately, he observed for 3 days, mapping their pattern. His patience allowed special operations to capture the entire cell alive. 17 insurgents taken into custody, 0 civilian deaths. At the bottom of his report, your lesson about restraint saved lives, ma'am. Monica exhaled, closing her eyes. The words struck harder than she expected. For so long she had believed her legacy was only blood, but here, in the voices of her students, was something different, something she hadn't thought possible. General Harrison leaned back in his chair, watching her carefully. "You realize what you've done," he said. "You've changed how an entire generation of snipers thinks about their profession." She shook her head. "No, I've just given them what I never had, a teacher who understood that precision without conscience is just destruction." But even as she said it, she felt the familiar ache in her chest. The reports were victories, but they didn't silence the voices. That night she dreamed again. Johnson and Miller, their laughter before the mission, the way hummed under his breath when he was nervous, the way Johnson always double-checked the radios, the way Miller cracked jokes to cut the tension. And then the explosion, the silence after, the guilt that never left. She woke gasping, gripping the photograph on her nightstand so tightly the frame cracked in her hands. The ghosts didn't care how many lives her students saved. They only asked one question over and over: why not us? The next day in class, Monica didn't hide her fatigue. She walked in, circles under her eyes, shoulders tense. The students noticed. They always noticed. Sergeant Williams raised his hand tentatively. "Ma'am, are you okay?" For a moment she considered lying, pretending, putting the mask back on, but she stopped herself. "No," she said simply, "I'm not." The room went still. Instructors weren't supposed to admit weakness, not in front of soldiers, but Monica wasn't interested in being the instructor they expected. "You want the truth?" she asked quietly. "I have nightmares every night. I see faces I can't forget. I hear voices I can't silence, and I carry them with me everywhere I go." Her voice cracked, but she pressed on. "If you think you can do this job and walk away clean, you're wrong. Every choice leaves a scar. Every shot leaves a ghost. You will carry them. The only question is how." The students sat frozen, stunned by her honesty. Monica looked at them one by one. "I carry mine by teaching you. Maybe that way their deaths will mean something more than my guilt." William swallowed hard. "Ma'am, is that enough?" She met his eyes, her own heavy with fatigue. "Some days it is, some days it is, but I wake up anyway, and that's the only way forward." The class stayed silent after that, each of them processing the raw truth of what she'd just given them. Weeks later, another message arrived. This time it wasn't a report, it was a text. From Sergeant Williams, now deployed in Iraq. "Ghost held my fire today. 3 kids in the target area, found another way. Mission complete. Everyone goes home, thank you." Monica stared at the words for a long time. Then she showed them to Harrison. "This," she said, her voice steady, "this is success, not the shot they make, the shot they choose not to make." Harrison studied her, something close to respect softening his features. "You've given them something bigger than skill, Monica. You've given them conscience." She turned away, because the weight of that praise pressed too close to the wounds she carried. Later, in the quiet of her quarters, she stared again at the cracked photograph of Johnson and Miller. "I couldn't save you," she whispered, "but maybe I can save them." For the first time in years, the words didn't feel like a lie. Why does recognition feel heavier than obscurity? For 15 years, Monica Cross had lived invisible, hiding behind the mask of Victoria Sterling. Now the opposite was true. At Fort, she could no longer walk a hallway without soldiers whispering her name. Ghost. The myth was alive again, only this time the myth was teaching. Reports from the field spread quickly. Missions changed. Collateral damage dropped. Commanders began to notice. Soldiers whispered about snipers who held their fire, about restraint as a weapon more powerful than precision. And always at the center of those whispers was the same name. Within months, the Pentagon came calling. General Harrison showed up at her office one evening, a folder tucked under his arm. His voice carried a note she had never heard before, respect edged with caution. "They want to expand the program," he said simply. "Not just here. Globally, Fort Benning, Okinawa, instructors trained under you teaching your lessons." Monica stared at him, the words sinking like stones. Expansion, global reach, her ghosts across continents. "What did you tell them?" she asked. "I told them it depends on you." Harrison set the folder on her desk. "This isn't just training anymore. It's a doctrine. You've changed the profession." Monica leaned back, staring at the ceiling. A doctrine. The word carried a weight she didn't want. Doctrine meant permanence. It meant she wasn't just shaping students. She was reshaping war itself. And she wasn't sure her soul could carry that. That night, the nightmares returned harder than ever. This time she wasn't just back at Firebase Phoenix. She was at all of them, Kandahar, the Hindu Kush. The faces blurred together. Johnson's grin, the Afghan boy's wide eyes, the Taliban sniper's last breath, Sergeant's American flag-draped coffin. They all stood in a line, staring at her, silent accusation in every gaze. "You made us," Johnson whispered. "With every trigger pull, with every decision, you created us." She woke screaming, sweat soaking the sheets, heart hammering as if the rifle's recoil still pressed into her shoulder. Her hands shook so badly she couldn't hold the glass of water on her nightstand. The next day she almost didn't go to class. She stood in front of the mirror in her quarters, staring at herself. The dark circles under her eyes, the haunted hollow behind them. She didn't look like a teacher anymore. She looked like a casualty still walking. But when she entered the classroom, 12 pairs of eyes looked up, waiting, expectant, trusting. And she realized they weren't waiting for a legend. They were waiting for someone human enough to tell them the truth. So she told them. "You think teaching saves me," she said, her voice raw. "It doesn't. Every lesson I give you, I bleed a little more. Every story I tell you, I relive it. The ghosts get louder." The students sat in stunned silence. Monica paced slowly, her hands clasped behind her back. "I need you to understand something. These lessons aren't theories. They're scars, and scars don't disappear. They grow, they twist. They remind you of what you lost." She turned to face them fully. "Do you still want to learn from me knowing that?" Corporal Jackson spoke first. His voice was quiet but steady. "Yes, ma'am, because scars tell us what survival looks like." The others nodded, added, "We don't need perfect, ma'am, we need real." The words pierced something in her chest. She had spent so long trying to be perfect, then so long trying to disappear. And here were 12 young warriors telling her that her imperfection, her brokenness, was the very reason they trusted her. A week later, Harrison delivered another report, this one classified. Eastern Europe. Jackson, now deployed, had identified a sniper team targeting NATO convoys. He tracked them for days, resisting the urge to fire until he discovered their true position. His patience allowed his unit to capture them alive, dismantling an entire network. 0 civilian deaths. At the bottom of the report, Jackson had written, "Ghosts show me patience is deadlier than bullets." Monica folded the report carefully, her throat tight. These weren't her victories, but they felt like redemption she'd never earned. And yet that night the ghosts still came. This time Johnson's voice was sharper, angry. "You saved them, but you couldn't save us." She woke trembling, gripping the cracked photograph until her nails dug into the glass. She knew then that no matter how many lives her students saved, the ghosts would never leave. They were part of her, the price of her precision. The question was no longer how to silence them. The question was whether she could keep teaching while carrying them. At the next class, she decided to tell them the truth she had always avoided. "I wasn't just erased from the records because I was dangerous," she said quietly. "I was erased because the army didn't know what to do with me. A legend who broke under her own perfection. A soldier who carried too much guilt to keep fighting, but too much skill to just let go. Her eyes swept the room. They turned me into a ghost because I scared them, not because of what I could do with a rifle, but because of what I couldn't do without one. The students shifted, unsettled. "Don't make the same mistake I did," Monica said, her voice low. "Don't let your skill become your identity. You're not just shooters, you're people. Sons, daughters, brothers, sisters. Don't bury that under the crosshairs." For a long time, nobody spoke, then whispered, "Ma'am, how do we keep from becoming ghosts too?" Her answer was slow, deliberate. By remembering that dignity doesn't speak, it acts, by carrying your ghosts with honor instead of silence. Her throat tightened, and by teaching others when your time comes. The weight of her words filled the room like smoke, and in that heavy silence, Monica Cross realized something she hadn't dared to admit before. She couldn't silence her ghosts, but maybe she didn't need to. Maybe carrying them openly was the point. And for the first time, she thought, maybe the ghosts weren't a curse. Maybe they were the lesson. What does it mean for a ghost to live again? At Fort, Monica Cross found the answer not in the roar of rifles, but in the quiet moments between. The classroom had become her battlefield, the whiteboard her rifle, her words the ammunition she offered the next generation. And somehow, against all odds, they listened. The Pentagon's decision came quietly at first, a memo delivered on plain stationery. Then another, then a stream. Within 6 months, her curriculum was slated for expansion worldwide. Fort Benning, Camp, Okinawa. Dozens of young instructors trained under her, carrying her lessons outward like ripples in water. Not marksmanship, she told them. Judgment, humanity, responsibility, that's the doctrine. And the reports kept coming back. From Syria, holding fire for days until capturing an entire IED cell alive. From Iraq, Williams refusing to fire into a compound until children were clear, then finding another way to complete the mission. From Eastern Europe, Jackson dismantling an enemy sniper team without a single civilian casualty. Each line read like a redemption she had never earned. Each report a reminder that her ghosts were not only hers anymore. But with each victory, the nights remained the same. The dreams didn't stop. Johnson still came, and Miller at his side, sometimes laughing, sometimes bleeding, always watching. The boy from Still stared with wide, betrayed eyes. Sergeant, dozens more. She carried them all, each one carved into her chest like tally marks. Yet something had changed. When she woke, gasping, trembling, clutching the cracked photograph, she no longer felt alone. Because now, in some other desert, some other mountain range, one of her students was making a choice with her voice in their head, choosing restraint, choosing patience, choosing to see the whole picture. And that somehow made the ghosts quieter, not silent, never silent, but quieter. On a cold evening, Harrison visited her office again, papers in his hand, a rare softness in his voice. "They're calling it the cross doctrine," he said. Monica blinked. "What?" He set the folder on her desk. "Not officially, of course, but the instructors, the commanders, the students, they've given it a name. They say you've changed how they think about war." Her throat tightened. She turned away, staring out the window at the distant range, the same range where she had revealed herself months earlier. The steel plates shimmered faintly in the sunset, by bullet holes but still standing. "I didn't want a doctrine," she whispered. "I know," Harrison said. "That's why it matters." For once she had no reply. Graduation day came quietly. 12 students lined up in the Carolina sun, medals and certificates gleaming on their uniforms. But Monica didn't speak of their skill. She didn't praise their groupings, their records, their impossible shots. She told them a story. October 2008, Firebase Phoenix. The air stilled. Johnson, Miller, 3 good men. I cleared a path for them with a perfect shot, and they died in the blast that followed. Her voice wavered, but she didn't look away. For years, I believed my precision killed them, that if I had been less skilled, they'd still be alive. But I was wrong. They were soldiers. They knew the risks. They chose to walk that path because it was their mission. My job was to give them a chance. Their job was to take it. She paused, letting the names settle into the silence. Remember them, she said softly. Not as casualties, not as ghosts, but as proof that soldiers are more than their shots. Their choices, courage, humanity. Carry that with you and you'll be better than I ever was. The students saluted, some with tears in their eyes, and in that moment Monica felt something she hadn't felt in 15 years. Not redemption, that was too neat, too clean. Purpose. Weeks later, she sat alone in her office after the students had shipped out. The sun was setting, painting the sky gold. On her desk lay the cracked photograph of Johnson and Miller. She traced their faces with her finger. Still teaching, she whispered. Different lessons now, but still teaching. Outside, the wind shifted, rustling the grass across the ranges. Monica noted the change automatically, the old instinct that never faded. But this time she smiled, because the habit wasn't just about killing anymore. It was about awareness, presence, life. The ghosts hadn't left her. They never would. But they no longer screamed. They simply stood beside her, silent companions, reminders of what precision really meant. And for the first time, Monica Cross thought, maybe being a ghost wasn't a curse. Maybe it was a way of walking forward without forgetting. Years from now, soldiers would whisper about her still. The woman who had made the impossible shot. The legend who trained the next generation. But that wasn't the legacy Monica wanted. Her legacy lived in the lives spared. The children who survived because her students held their fire. The families who didn't grieve because someone paused, thought, and chose restraint. She had been a legend once. Now she was something quieter, something stronger. A teacher. And as the last light of day faded across Fort, Monica Cross closed her eyes, let the silence settle, and finally understood the truth she had been running from all her life. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.